Kuwait has a constitutional monarchy with a parliamentary system of government and has the oldest directly elected parliament among the Gulf states. Kuwait has always adopted democracy and consultation to be the principles of running the country's affairs. Democracy, which is based on public participation, serves justice and provides security for both the ruler and citizens. The spirit of democratic practice has begun in the state of Kuwait since 1752, when residents, through consultations, agreed at that time to nominate Al-Sabah family as rulers of the state, as they realized the necessity to preserve their country. Al-Sabah family held presidency since then after a pledge of allegiance by the Kuwaiti people. This pledge was the first pillar and the foundation of Kuwait's democratic regime. The democracy spirit is deeply rooted in the Kuwaiti society and reflected in the behavior that governs the relationships between the ruler and those ruled since the emergence of the State of Kuwait. The starting date of parliamentary history in Kuwait goes back to the year 1921, when on February 22nd the country's dignitaries met the ruling Al-Sabah family, demanding greater participation in running the country. Following the talks and consultations, the first consultative council was established in June of the year 1921, paving the way for other greater achievements that led to the establishment of the first and second legislative councils in 1938 and 1939. The Kuwaiti people were the first people in the Arabian Gulf to elect a legislative council in 1938. This democratic experience was unique and opened the way to the second stage of democracy in the post-independence era in the country. It is the Kuwaiti people who immediately after independence worked for establishing the foundations of the institutional rule. This gave the state society the opportunity to integrate more with the political administration consisting of three powers: the legislative, the executive and the judicial. As soon as Kuwait gained its independence on June 19, 1961, an agreement that was signed between the seventh ruler of the country, Sheikh Mubarak al-Sabah, and Britain was terminated. The Emir of Kuwait back then, Sheikh Abdullah Salim al-Sabah, expressed his desire to complete the establishment of the government and constitutional bodies as soon as possible. On August 26, 1961, only 2 months after signing the Independence Treaty, Sheikh Abdullah Salim issued an Emiri Decree No. 12 calling for the establishment of a Constituent Assembly to draft the country's constitution. The organizational body, comprised of 11 members, succeeded in drafting Law No. 25 of 1961 on the election of the members of the Constituent Assembly. The Constituent Assembly members' election law was issued on September 6, 1961, and it divided Kuwait to 10 electoral districts, and in each district 2 members should be elected. According to the law, candidates had to be at least 30 years old and able to read and write, and that the Constituent Assembly was to expire after 1 year from the day of the election results were announced, unless the constitution said otherwise. Following the issuance of the election law and the rapid development to set up a parliamentary system to serve the interests of Kuwaiti citizens, the first general elections were held on December 30th, 1961, to elect 20 members of the Constituent Assembly. 11 ministers were added to the elected members from outside the Assembly. The ministers were refrained to vote on the Constitution articles while being passed in the Constituent Assembly. In huge celebrations, the Emir opened its first session on January 20th, 1962 in the Municipal House, in which he emphasized on the importance of democracy in building a modern state. During the first session, the Assembly chose by acclamation Abdul-Latif Thnayan al-Ghanem as its Speaker, and on March 3, 1962, it formed a committee consisting of the late Father Emir Sheikh Saad al-Abdallah Sabah, al-Ghanem, Ya'qub al-Hmedi, Hmoud al-Khalid and Saud al-Abd al-Razzaq to prepare a draft of the Constitution. The Parliament held 32 sittings until January 15, 1963, and was accredited with drafting the country's constitution and rules regulating the National Assembly's elections. The draft was ready, discussed and approved by the Constituent Assembly, then presented to Sheikh Abdullah Salim, who endorsed it on November 8, 1962, and issued it on November 11th the same year. It was later published in a special edition of the Official Gazette. Upon presenting the draft to Sheikh Abdullah Salim, al-Ghanem described the day as historic and expressed hope that the Constitution would achieve the aspiration of the Kuwaiti people. For his part, Sheikh Abdullah Salim thanked the committee for its sincere efforts in putting in place a constitution that was based on democracy and suited the state's traditions and aspirations. On January 15, 1963, the Constituent Assembly held its closing session, and the late Emir Sheikh Jabir al-Ahmed al-Jabr al-Sabah, who was then acting Deputy Prime Minister, gave a speech stressing that the Assembly was successful in realizing the desire of Sheikh Abdullah Salim. Only 7 days later, elections were held for the country's first National Assembly. Subsequent elections were held in 1967, 1971 and 1975. However, from 1976 to 1981, the National Assembly was suspended. Following elections in 1981 and 1985, the National Assembly was again dissolved. After the Iraqi invasion, new elections for the National Assembly were held in 1992. National Assemblies of the years 1999, 2006, 2008, 2009 and February and December 2012 were dissolved, but new elections were held within 60 days in compliance with the Constitution. The State of Kuwait is the first state in the Arabian Peninsula to have its own constitution and an elected National Assembly, which forms a strong pillar of democracy with all its dimensions and meanings. The Constitution of Kuwait was created by the Constituent Assembly in 1961 to 1962 and signed into law on November 11, 1962 by the late Emir Sheikh Abdullah Salim al-Sabah. The people of Kuwait, represented by the National Assembly and the Emir, cooperated together in putting the Constitution. Both of them worked together to amend the Constitution as specified by the explanatory memorandum of the Constitution. The explanatory memorandum stipulates that no amendment shall be brought forward unless the two parties, namely the Emir and the Constituent Assembly, cooperated in drafting the constitution. The constitution establishes Kuwait as a constitutional monarchy, and Islam is the state religion and is based on the democratic principles and combines the positive aspects of both presidential and parliamentary systems prevailing in advanced democratic countries. The pillars of the constitution are the sovereignty of the state, public freedom and equality before the law. The Constitution of the State of Kuwait is composed of 183 articles divided into 5 chapters. The first one is the state and the system of government, which stipulated that Kuwait is an Arab state, independent and fully sovereign. The people of Kuwait are part of the Arab nation. The religion of the state is Islam, and the official language is Arabic. The system of government in Kuwait shall be democratic. The second is fundamental constituents of Kuwaiti society. This part stipulates that justice, liberty and equality are the pillars of the society. The state safeguards pillars of the society and ensures security, tranquility and equal opportunities for citizens. It also stipulates that family is the cornerstone of the society and is founded on religion, morality and patriotism. It added that law shall preserve the integrity of the family, strengthen its ties and protect it under the umbrella of motherhood and childhood. According to the Constitution, the state cares for the young and ensures aid for the elderly and unemployed. It also states that education is fundamental. The national economy shall be based on social justice and should be founded on fair cooperation between the public and private sector. Public rights and duties is the third chapter of the Constitution. It stipulates that no Kuwaiti may be deported from Kuwait or prevented from returning. All people are equal in public rights and duties before the law without distinction. This chapter states that the freedom of belief is absolute and the freedom of opinion and scientific research shall be guaranteed. It also guarantees the freedom of press and communication and the freedom to form associations and unions. The fourth part of the Constitution deals with powers. It includes general provision, which stipulates that the system of government is based on the principle of the separation of the powers, functioning in cooperation with each other in accordance with the provisions of the Constitution. The first part of this chapter states that the legislative power shall be vested in the Emir and the National Assembly, while the executive power shall be vested in the Emir, the Cabinet and the Ministers. The judicial power shall be vested in the courts, which shall exercise it in the name of the Emir. The judicially independent Constitutional Court and the Emir both have the authority to dissolve the National Assembly but must subsequently call a national election. The second part talks about the head of the state and stipulates in Article 54 that the Emir is the head of the state. His person is immune. The Emir, according to the Constitution, shall declare defensive war by decree, while offensive war is prohibited. He shall exercise his powers through the ministers. Legislative power is the third part of this chapter, which stipulates that no law may be circulated unless it has been passed by the National Assembly and sanctioned by the Emir. The fifth chapter of the Constitution covers the general and transitional provisions. This chapter covers the article which states that the Emir or one-third of the members of the National Assembly have the right to propose a revision of the Constitution by amending or deleting one or more of its provisions or by adding new provisions. It also covered topics related to the powers of the Emir, the constitution of treaties with international organizations, and the publication and continuation of approved laws. The chapter stipulates that no provision of this constitution may be suspended except when martial law is in force and within the limits specified by the law. But under no circumstances may the meetings of the National Assembly be suspended, nor shall the immunities of its members be interfered during such period. The Constitution of Kuwait provides the regulations for ensuring wide popular participation in the issues of rule and control over the executive power and the basic freedoms of citizens. It has specified such roles and duties that ensure equilibrium among the three powers, the legislative, the executive, and the judicial. According to the Constitution, a member of Parliament should be a Kuwaiti by origin in accordance with the law, qualified as an electoral in accordance with the electoral law, at least 30 years old at the time of the election, and be able to read and write the Arabic language. The Constitution also prohibits political parties, meaning that all candidates run as independent. The National Assembly. The National Assembly plays a real role in decision-making, with powers to initiate legislation, interpellate cabinet ministers, and conduct a vote of non-confidence for individual ministers. The head of the state is the Emir, who has extensive competencies, who along with his cabinet constitutes the executive branch. The Emir is also part of the legislative branch along with the National Assembly of Kuwait. The National Assembly has 50 seats elected equally from each constituency. The Parliament can be dismissed by the Emir, which is usually followed by elections, within 2 months. Kuwait was divided into 10 constituencies in the National Assembly elections between 1963 and 1975. Each constituency elected 5 MPs to the National Assembly. Before the 1981 elections, the government redistricted Kuwait, creating a system of 25 constituencies. Each of the 25 constituencies elected 2 members to the National Assembly for a total of 50 elected members, with each voter casting ballots for 2 candidates. In 2006, the National Assembly passed legislation to divide Kuwait into 5 electoral constituencies only. Voters then could cast votes for 4 candidates, and in each constituency, the highest 10 candidates earned seats in the National Assembly. The National Assembly is composed of several parliamentary committees, each serving a different area. These committees are crucial to the legislative and oversight processes, as through these committees, the bills are first discussed, investigations are conducted, and ordinary citizen concerns are raised. Committee chairs and rapporteurs are frequently called upon to update Parliament during its regular and open sessions on the status of their work, especially if the topic discussed falls under a committee's focus area. Currently, the National Assembly is composed of 18 such committees, 10 of which are permanent and 8 are temporary. No committee may have more than 9 members at any given time. Committee members are elected at the start of each parliamentary session for 1-year term, and MPs may run for as many parliamentary committees as they wish. There are no limits as to the number of times an MP may serve on any given committee. The permanent committees are the Committee for Defence and Interior, the Committee for State Budget, the Committee on Economic and Financial Affairs, the Committee on Legislative and Legal Affairs, the Committee for Education and Culture, the Committee for Health, Social and Labour Affairs, the Committee on Foreign Affairs, the Committee for Public Facilities, the Committee for the Protection of Public Funds, and the Committee for Public Petitions and Grievances. The National Assembly has had 8 National Assembly Speakers in its history, and they are Abdulatif Thnayan Al-Ghanem, who was the Speaker of the Constituent Assembly between 1962 and 1963. Al-Ghanem participated in 1938 in the Legislative Council election and was one of the members of the council consisting of 20 members. He successfully participated in the municipal elections in 1954 and became the chief of Kuwait municipality in 1962. He resigned from the municipal council to run for elections to the Constituent Assembly of Kuwait, where he became the chairman of the board and the chairman of the Commission on the Status of the Constitution. The most important achievement of the council was the adoption of the Constitution of Kuwait in November 3, 1962. The Speaker of the National Assembly for the first legislative term for the second period between 1963 and 1965 is Abdulaziz Hamad Al-Sagr. He was elected a member of the Constituent Assembly in 1962 and had served as Minister of Health and the first Council of Ministers in Kuwait. He was a member of the National Assembly in 1963, which nominated him to become the Speaker. Saud Abdulaziz Al-Abd Al-Razzaq was the Speaker of the National Assembly for the first legislative term between 1965 and 1967. He participated in the elections of the Constituent Assembly and the Kuwaiti National Assembly elections in 1963. He was the head of the National Assembly since 1965 and until 1967. He was the Deputy Speaker of the Assembly between 1963 and 1965. Ahmed Zaid Al-Sarhan became the Speaker of the National Assembly for the second legislative term for the period between 1967 and 1970. Al-Sarhan was a football player in Kuwait's national team, which was formed in 1932. He has been a member of the National Assembly since 1963 and became a Speaker for it from 1967 until 1970. Khalid Saleh Al-Ghanem was the Speaker of the National Assembly for the third and fourth legislative terms for the periods between 1971 and 1975 and for the period between 1975 and 1976. He was the first person to be the Speaker of the National Assembly for 2 consecutive sessions. Al-Ghanem had opened a trade office downtown Kuwait in 1956, and in 1957 he was appointed Director General of the Department of Works. He took part in the elections of the National Assembly in 1963 and became Deputy Speaker in the years 1967, 1971 and 1975. The Speaker of the National Assembly for the fifth legislative term was Muhammad Yusuf Al-Adsani for the period between 1981 and 1985. He was the former Speaker of the National Assembly between 1981 and 1985. He also took over some ministerial posts, being the Minister of Planning in 1976 and 1978 and the Minister of Public Works in 1978. Ahmed Abdelaziz Al-Sadoun was the Speaker of the National Assembly for the 6th, 7th and the 8th legislative terms for the period between 1985 to 1986, from 1992 to 1996 and from 1996 to 1999. Al-Sadoun participated in the elections for the National Assembly in 1967 in the 6th constituency and became the 7th with 344 votes and lost the elections. He again participated in the year 1975 in the 2nd constituency and became 2nd with 641 votes to win the elections. He was elected as Deputy of the Speaker for the same term and again participated in 1981 and was nominated again for the same post. He became the Speaker of the National Assembly for the first time after winning the elections in 1985. Jassim Mohammed Al-Khrafi was the Speaker of the National Assembly for the 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th and 13th legislative terms from 1999 to 2003, from 2003 to 2006, for the period between 2006 to 2008, from 2008 to 2009 and from 2009 to 2011. Kharafi was elected Speaker of the National Assembly for the first time in 1999. He was re-elected as Speaker of the National Assembly in all elections that followed until he decided that he would not stand for re-election in the 2012 National Assembly elections. The National Assembly has succeeded to be the democratic tool that gave a chance to all people to express their views and participate in the decision-making process. It has also succeeded in being a real legislative institution that introduced to the Kuwaiti society a political mechanism to enable them to participate in the progress of the development of the State of Kuwait. The Kuwaiti democratic experience stems from the belief of the Kuwaiti people and from its unique history and environment. These factors formed a distinctive democratic practice that includes diverse opinions and attitudes as practiced in an atmosphere of freedom, kindness, tolerance, consultation and sovereignty of law. On such promising deeds, we build our hopes and aspirations in a brighter future for the State of Kuwait, for its honourable people, under the leadership of His Highness the Emir, Sheikh Sabah Al-Ahmed Al-Jaber Al-Sabah.